The kerosene lamp on the kitchen table had burned down to almost nothing, and my father's hand was wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour before. I was 16 years old, sitting on a wooden bench across from him, my hands folded in my lap the way my mother had taught me, and I was listening to him explain, in a calm voice in Pennsylvania Dutch, that I was going to marry a man I had spoken to exactly 4 times in my entire life. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. His name was Eli Stoltzfus. He was 26 years old. He owned 80 acres of land 2 counties over, and he needed a wife because his mother was dying, and somebody had to run the household. His father had approached my father after Sunday service 3 weeks earlier. They had shaken hands behind the buggy shed. The arrangement was already made. My father told me this the way a man tells you the weather is changing. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just as a fact of the world I was now expected to step into. I remember staring at that lamp, at the wick curling black inside the glass, and thinking that nobody had asked me a single question. Not what I wanted, not what I felt, not whether I knew this man's voice well enough to recognize it in the dark. That was 68 years ago. I have never told this story out loud. I am telling it now because I am 84 years old, and I have decided that some truths should not die with the woman who carried them. Before I go any further, my name is Martha, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl. I grew up Old Order Amish in a small district in eastern Pennsylvania, and now, at the end of my life, I am sharing the stories that women in my community were never permitted to speak out loud. If you value hearing the truth from someone who actually lived it, subscribe and like this video and tell me in the comments. Have you ever heard of an Amish marriage being arranged like a business agreement? I want to know what brought you here. Now let me explain something that took me most of my life to fully understand. In the outside world, when people hear the word arranged marriage, they think of cultures very far away. They do not think of plain people in white prayer caps in the green hills of Pennsylvania. But the truth is, in the most conservative Amish communities, especially in the 1950s, when I was a girl, marriages were rarely the romantic choices people imagine today. They were practical arrangements between families. A farm needed a wife. A widow needed a husband. A dying mother needed a daughter-in-law to take over the kitchen. And a 16-year-old girl with strong hands and a quiet temperament was, in the language of my father's generation, a useful match. The word the English use is sold. We never said sold. We said given. We said promised. We said arranged. But sitting across from my father that night, watching him sip cold coffee and explain my future, the difference between those words felt very small. Here is what people outside the community do not understand about how it worked. There was no ceremony of agreement, no exchange of money I ever saw. What was exchanged was harder to name. My father gained a connection to the Stoltzfus family, who had standing in their district. Eli's father gained a daughter-in-law to nurse his dying wife and bear his grandchildren. And I gained, in the language of the Ordnung, a husband and a household and a calling that I had not chosen. I had met Eli 4 times. The first time was at a barn raising when I was 14. He passed me a jug of water and said, "Denki." "Thank you." The second time was at a funeral. He nodded at me across the grave. The third time was at a wedding where he watched me from across the room and never crossed it. The fourth time was the Sunday before my father told me. Eli had come to our house for the noon meal, sat at our table, ate my mother's chicken and noodles, and said almost nothing the entire afternoon. I had thought he was just a quiet visitor. I did not know I was being inspected. The wedding was set for November, 3 months away. I want to tell you what those 3 months felt like, because this is where the story gets harder to tell. I did not cry. I did not refuse. I did not, in any way that was visible, resist. Because in my community in that time, refusal was not a category that existed. You could refuse to marry the man your father had chosen, yes. But the cost of that refusal was the loss of everything: your family, your church, your standing, your roof. There was a cousin of mine who had refused a match 2 years before. By the time of my wedding, she was working as a maid for an English family in Lancaster, and her name was no longer spoken at our table. I had seen what refusal cost. I did not have the courage for it. And so I learned in those 3 months to do something that has shaped every year of my life since. I learned to make my face still and let my insides go somewhere else. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. I sewed my own wedding dress, plain blue, the way it was done in our district. My mother sewed beside me at the kitchen table and never once asked me how I felt. I think she could not afford to ask. I think if she had asked and I had answered honestly, both of us would have broken something we could not put back together. So we stitched in silence, and at night I would lie in the bed I had slept in since I was a small child and stare at the ceiling and try to picture Eli's face, and I would realize that I could not remember it clearly. I was about to marry a man whose face I could not hold steady in my own mind. The wedding day came, 300 people in my parents' barn. The bishop preached for 2 hours about Gelassenheit, about yielding, about a wife's submission to her husband as the church submits to Christ. I stood beside Eli and said the words I was supposed to say. My voice did not shake. I had practiced it, not shaking. And when the meal was finished and the guests were leaving and my mother held me for one long moment by the door of the buggy, she whispered 3 words into my hair. She said, "Be a good wife." That was all. No instruction, no warning, no preparation for anything that was about to happen. Be a good wife. And then I climbed into the buggy beside a man I did not know, and we drove 2 hours in the November dark to a farmhouse I had never seen. His mother was still alive when I arrived. She lived for 4 more months. I nursed her. I changed her bedding. I fed her broth with a spoon when her hands could no longer hold one. She was a kind woman. On the last week of her life, she held my wrist with fingers like dry sticks, and she looked at me and she said in Pennsylvania Dutch, "I am sorry, child. I am sorry he has you so young." And then she closed her eyes, and she did not open them again for a day and a half. That was the only apology I would ever receive from the Stoltzfus family, from anyone, about any of it. Eli was not a cruel man. I want to say that plainly because the story I am telling is not the story of a monster. The story I am telling is harder than that. Eli was a man who had been raised exactly as he was supposed to be raised, in a community that taught him a wife was given to him by God, and her purpose was to keep his house and bear his children and submit to his leading. He did not know to ask me what I wanted. It had never occurred to him that I might want something. He was not unkind. He simply did not see me, not as a person with an interior. He saw me as a wife, which was a category, and he treated the category with the respect the ordinance required. He provided. He did not raise his voice. He did not strike me. By the standards of my community, by the standards of his upbringing, he was a good husband, and I lived for 63 years beside a man who never once in all those years asked me what I was thinking. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. We had 8 children. The first came when I was 17, the last when I was 34. I will not pretend I did not love them. I loved them with everything I had. They were the country I lived in. They were the reason I got up before dawn for 40 years. But I also want to be honest, because I am 84 and there is no more time for the polite version. I had my first child before I understood my own body. I had my second before I understood what had happened to me on my wedding night. I had my third before I had ever, in my life, been asked the simple question, "What do you want, Martha?" I built a household. I baked bread for a family of 10 every other day. I canned hundreds of jars of tomatoes every summer. I sewed every dress my daughters wore until they were old enough to sew their own. I sang the hymns. I sat on the bench in church for hours. I kept my face still. I let my insides go somewhere else. And underneath all of it, for 63 years, there was a sentence I never spoke. Not to Eli, not to my mother before she died, not to my daughters when they were old enough to hear it. The sentence was this: I was sold to a man at 16, and nobody asked me, and I have spent my entire life building a house on top of that silence. Here is what I have learned sitting in this small apartment now, 8 years after Eli passed, and 4 years after I left the community to live near my youngest daughter, who left before me. I have learned that silence is a kind of work. It costs something to maintain. For 68 years, I did the work of silence, and I did not understand until I stopped how heavy that work had been. When my daughter Rebecca, my youngest, came to me when she was 19 and told me she was leaving the church, I did not say what I felt. What I felt was, go. Go and do not look back. Go and choose your own husband or no husband. Go and learn what your body is for. Go and ask the questions I was never allowed to ask. But what I said was, your father will be heartbroken, because the work of silence was still happening even then. It took me until I was 80 to stop doing it. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. The English counselor I started seeing 2 years ago, after Rebecca insisted, asked me one afternoon what I would say to the 16-year-old girl sitting across from her father at that kitchen table 68 years ago. I could not answer her. I sat in her office and I cried for 40 minutes, and she did not rush me. And when I could finally speak, what I said was this: I would tell her that she was not a useful match. I would tell her that she was a person. I would tell her that the stillness she was learning to put on her face was going to cost her everything for the next 60 years. And I would tell her, even though I cannot go back and tell her, that the silence was not faithfulness. The silence was a wound that the community called holy, because it was easier than healing it. I do not want to leave you thinking I hate the world I came from. I want to be careful here, because the truth is more complicated than hatred. The Amish gave me real things. They gave me a community that showed up when my barn burned in 1971 and rebuilt it in 3 days. They gave me sisters in the faith who held my hand when I buried 2 children, one as an infant and one at the age of 9. They gave me the smell of fresh bread on a Tuesday morning and the sound of Pennsylvania Dutch hymns sung slow in a quiet room. And there is a part of me that will mourn those things until the day I die. But the same community that gave me those things also handed me to a man at 16 and called it God's will. Both things are true. And for 68 years, I was only allowed to speak about one of them. I am 84. I do not have many years left to tell the truth. So I am telling it now, to whoever is listening, to whatever girl in whatever community is sitting across from her father tonight, being told that her future has already been decided by men who did not think to ask her, to whatever woman is lying beside a husband she did not choose, doing the work of silence, letting her insides go somewhere else. I want her to know that the silence is not faithfulness. I want her to know that her wanting is not sin. I want her to know that being useful is not the same as being loved, and being given is not the same as being chosen. And a life built on top of a silence is still a life with a silence underneath it. And the silence does not go away just because you have learned to live above it. I learned that too late to change my own life. I am telling you so that maybe you do not have to learn it as late as I did. If you grew up in a world where your future was decided by other people, and you were taught to call that obedience, I see you. If you spent decades of your life keeping your face still while something inside you went somewhere else, I see you. If you are sitting somewhere right now and the words I am speaking are landing in a place that you have not let anyone touch in a very long time, I see you. You are not alone in that place. You were never alone in that place. There were thousands of us in plain dresses and prayer caps, in farmhouses up and down these hills, doing the work of silence for our entire lives. And some of us, before we go, are finally putting it down. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. If this story moved you, tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me if you have a Martha in your own family, a grandmother or a great aunt who carried something her whole life and never said it out loud. And if you want to keep hearing the truths from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah, the Amish girl. There is still so much that has not been said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.